Of tomorrow's papers with The Guardian and a plan by Labour to force the sale of land to the state.
Now, this is one story I'm really animated about. So Labour's shadow housing minister has this grand plan for resolving the housing shortage. And what his special plan is basically involves forcing landowners, so people who maybe have several acres, in some cases it could be many more acres than several, to sell off their land at the price of its value at this point, which would be an agricultural price, which typically would be, let's say, somewhere between £10,000 and £15,000 an acre. Now, what a lot of landowners do, quite reasonably in my view, is continue farming their land and holding on to it until they manage to get planning permission on that land, at which point the value of their land goes up. And this Labour proposal is to take the land from them at the agricultural price and build social or council housing on it. Now, I have a massive issue on a point of principle about this, because essentially what it is redistribution. And, you know, where do you draw the line on that? Sonia, I can see you already looking cynical, but, you know, where do you draw the line about just seizing people's assets and forcing them to sell at a price that is below the value that they are potentially able to achieve?
Well, I think this policy is a lot less radical than it actually first appears. So the thing
you wouldn't think so if you owned any land.
Well, the thing we need to know about land is it's a fixed asset. There's only a certain amount of it, and therefore we need to think very carefully about how we treat it. Now, if you own land, and there are lots of people who own vast, you know, the church owns a lot of land. There are sort of members of the, you know, old-fashioned landed nobility that own, like,
I think a Labour policy that seized land from the church would be one that bombed pretty fast.
It's not seizing land from the church.
It's seizing the value of the land.
It's just saying your land is worth this much at market value. We will give you that market value. At the moment, the way that the system works is that people can sit on large amounts of land. Local authorities, government will come along and change its status. The charity shelters looked into this. The amount that land goes up by can be as much as a factor of 328. Those are huge windfall gains to people who already own land.
But you have to invest in the land.
That's not fair. And there are lots of European countries where actually local authorities, local government has the power to buy land at its existing market value, and then local government changes its planning status. And it works really well. It happens like that in the Netherlands, for example. So I think it's crazy that we allow very, very large landowners to make huge windfall gains. They've not done anything to deserve this increase. And actually, it's really holding up our housing market, and it makes house building much, much more expensive, pushes up the value of land. So I think this is an absolutely brilliant idea.
You're just challenge the whole way the market economy works. You know, if you have a principle,
no, because you're paying,
that the government can decide,
land for free.
But you're seizing the land at a price that is well below its potential.
But it's not. This is a regulated part of the economy anyway.
How is it different from your
incredibly
house,
different to that.
Well,
actually, the government can, and local authorities can buy people's houses through compulsory purchase orders if you're going to have some development.
They also can do for land, for very essential things.
So actually it's just an extension of that.
I'm going to have to move us on to the Daily Mirror before we run out of time. And this is a story about the NHS. Most of us, according to the Mirror, would pay £1 a week to save the NHS from being destroyed, is the words.
So this is it's a new poll by the Mirror. Actually, it comes in a long line of polls that show that the one thing that the public is prepared to pay more tax for is the NHS. The NHS occupies a very special place in people's hearts. You know, it's actually, culturally, when you look at the NHS and the affection that it commands, it's quite unique.
It's like above almost anything except the Queen.
Absolutely. I mean, it was in the Olympic opening ceremony in 2012. So I think, you know, this Mirror story is actually telling us it should be sending a strong signal to government. The NHS is really creaking at the seams. It's got its historically lowest funding settlement for decades, and it is in desperate need of more cash, and people are willing to pay for it. So why don't we do something about it? And actually, I think it's ideology on the part of the government. They don't want to be seen to be putting taxes up because they're Tories. When Gordon Brown did this in 2001, 2002, it was the most popular tax rise ever.
Actually,
People really
supported
it.
Tried to bring in a hypothecated tax for the NHS, and it didn't work.
No, they put on a penny on national insurance for the NHS. They said it was for the NHS.
It hasn't really worked, has it? Because we're still in the dire straits, which leads me to the conclusion.
Brilliantly back then. It's only since the Conservatives have come to government that it hasn't worked, because they've cut the tax.
But there is, of course, a suspicion suggestion that the Conservatives want to privatise the NHS, and that's all the moves that are being made at the moment.
Where do you get that suspicion from?
Well, people would suggest that within the NHS, that all of the moves at the moment are moving towards
actually the greatest degree of privatisation of NHS services was actually during the Labour years, and quite right too. Alan Milburn, the then Health Secretary, actually contracted out a vast amount, and that did improve efficiency in many ways.
But a big 73% in that poll backing more money for the NHS in taxes. That's all we've got time for now. We'll be back in the next hour, but now let's take a look at the weather.
From the clear blue sky